You're listening to Sound Radio Politics. I have the Liberal Democrat candidate with me today. Thank you very much for joining me.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for asking me to come.
That's fantastic. And basically what this is going to be half an hour of questions. Feel free to answer however you like. We'd just like to get a gauge of who you are as a person and what your policies are.
Fair enough. I'll do my best.
We're going to start with some local and student-focused questions because I've lived in Winchester all my life and I'm kind of the person on the team that's focused on local issues and things like that. But of course, you were elected as a councillor in the previous local elections. Steve Brine himself has been working for around about a decade. So I was just wondering if you could tell our listeners what sets you apart from Steve and why they should vote for you, first off.
I've lived and worked in Winchester for 20 years. It is where I work, where I brought up my family. I've always been really heavily involved in the community, whether that's in environmental groups. I'm recently involved in a relatively new group called Plastics Free Winchester, where we're trying to reduce single-use plastic in the city. But I've been involved in lots of groups supporting families. I was involved very early on in a campaign where a phone company wanted to put a mast on my children's primary school, and I was worried about the impact that would have on them, so went against that. I did get elected as a city councillor in May, and the reason for standing in May was primarily that there's so much you can do to change things from the outside, but you can have much, much more influence from the inside.
Yeah.
So already the council, with a new Liberal Democrat majority, has introduced a climate emergency, and we are making steps to start addressing climate issues and what we can do to reduce carbon here in Winchester and Chelmsford. But the reason that makes me a good candidate is, yes, I don't have years of experience in Parliament. I'm not a career politician, but I have a huge depth and breadth of experience outside of Parliament. So I started in corporate banking in London. I then moved from there into management consultancy. I did that for a while, but in my late 30s I retrained in psychology, and for the last 10 plus years I've been working in education with children with developmental and learning difficulties. I've also a long-term volunteer at the food bank here locally, so I see firsthand what some Conservative policies have done to people's lives around universal credit, around the bedroom tax. I think I have a depth and breadth of understanding of the issues that will serve me well in Parliament. And also, having lived here, I know what's important to local people.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Of course, students will associate or could associate the Liberal Democrats with saying that they were going to, of course, cancel the tuition fees, and obviously that never happened under the coalition. So what message do you have for the students that potentially could feel a little bit dismayed by that decision all those years ago?
I think that if you make a promise, you should fulfil it. But I think it was a promise that we couldn't make and fulfil. Yes, we were in coalition, but we were the minority partner. And in fact, 26 Liberal Democrat MPs voted against raising tuition fees. Tuition fees were already there. I think the issue now is that I would like to see a system where if there was all the money in the world, that we would have free education for everybody all the way through. But actually, less than half the people ever get to university. And our focus now is actually on making sure we put the money into education early on, the money that's needed in primary years, in preschool, particularly pupil premium, that can make a difference to people's ability to get to university. So we want to put the money in there. But I also think we need to look at student fees really seriously, because I know from my own sons that the psychological sort of impact of having a massive loan, they worry about it, and I think we need to look at funding again. The other thing I just want to mention is we definitely have to look at the egregious, the ridiculously high interest rates that students pay on their loans. I think it's 6.1%. And that's outrageous. You don't pay that for a mortgage. You don't pay that for a car loan. No. So why should students be paying that? Students are not a cash cow. We need to look at that, and it's not being talked about.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much again. Of course, the main policy of the Liberal Democrats on a national scale in this election is to stop Brexit and revoke Article 50. Of course, if you do revoke Article 50, Brexit would then, in effect, be over. So I'm wondering, outside of Brexit and things, what would your main policies be for Winchester if you were to stand in Parliament?
So our main policies, Brexit actually is an issue for Winchester. We know that local businesses can't recruit the staff they need, whether it's people working in media or in digital, but whether it's people working in the health sector. We know that our European nurses and doctors feel less welcome. We know we have a lack of psychiatrists. A lot of these people come from the EU. It's also in our farming industry in the constituency. They're telling me that they can't get the workers that they need because they don't feel welcome. So Brexit affects our businesses. It also affects jobs going forward, because there are two of our largest employers in this constituency who have set up satellite businesses now on mainland Europe, and they're thinking about transferring some of their business there because they're worried about Brexit. Now the key thing is, particularly for this university, for graduates coming out of this university, a lot of people want to stay and they want to be able to live and work here. And Brexit will make that harder. But you asked about local issues, so talking about staying, living and working here, we do have a problem with housing in Winchester. It's pretty unaffordable for the vast majority of people. Even as a student, you're probably having to pay much more than you would like to. So we need to make sure that we provide the housing at an affordable level. Secure housing doesn't have to be owned, but if it's rented, it needs to be secure at a level that people can afford to live here so they can live and work here. I spoke to a policeman recently. He told me he was brought up in an area of the city near Tesco's, big Tesco's,
Yep.
on the edge of the city. And he said from the age of 6, he knew he'd never be able to afford to live here. This is a policeman, this is a key worker. We need to make sure that we have enough homes, but they're affordable so people can live and work here. And that will also help us with the climate emergency.
Yeah.
Now, key policy for me is actually making sure that we can address the carbon we produce here locally, address the congestion. So the Liberal Democrats, we have clear plans about a national bus strategy, giving local authorities the ability to put in place new bus routes, to actually do through ticketing. And it isn't just in Winchester, it's people in Chandler's Ford, they can't get a bus to Eastleigh, people in the villages. There's one village near Winchester called Littleton. They have one bus a day. You can get the bus into the city at 9:30 and you can go home at about 3:30. Other than that, there's no public transport. So dealing with public transport, making it more sustainable, that's a key issue. There are so many things I could go on.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I will now hand you over to Silas with some more nationally focused questions.
Thank you, Josh, and hello, Paula. So I'm going to start with some more sort of national questions. But before we do that, I thought it'd just be interesting if you could comment on the polling, because I found it quite interesting that at the beginning of the election campaign, your party were polling around 20%, and it has now fallen to about 14% nationally, not in Winchester. Why do you think that is?
So there are a number of issues there. First of all, I would say that we can't always rely on the polls. There's a lot of volatility in the polls, and we saw that in 2017 because nobody predicted the results. It's also true that in this election, people aren't necessarily going to be voting on the same lines that they've always voted to in the past. So it might not be traditional lines of am I Lib Dem, am I Conservative, am I Labour. It could be around Remain and Leave for a lot of people. The other thing is that when polling's done, it often doesn't pick up the younger vote. Pollsters don't often get to what young people are thinking, how they might vote. But you asked the question about why has our level in the polls perhaps dropped. There is a key issue here around the Brexit Party. Now, when the Brexit Party decided to, in many ways, endorse the Conservative Party, so we now know that the Brexit Party stood aside in over 300 seats. And one of those seats was a seat here. And they said they did it because they were worried that if they didn't, the Liberal Democrats would take seats off the Tories it would change the balance in Parliament to the extent there would be enough Remain MPs that there would have to be a people's vote, a confirmatory referendum on whether or not people do not want to leave. And they were worried about that vote. And the key thing there is, why were they worried? We've been told over and over again that everybody still wants to leave. So why is it they were so worried that if there were to be a vote, that people would tell them something different? So I think it's changed, and what often happens, we did have 4 parties vying in this election, when the Brexit Party pretty much pulled out of half the seats. It then goes back to being first past the post, 2 main parties, and that squeezes the Liberal Democrats. But I think people should look less than nationally. There are definitely regional differences. We're polling much, much higher than that in pockets throughout the country, particularly around London and the southwest and elsewhere. And here, the polling shows that we're doing very well.
Thank you. And I got a leaflet through my door from the Lib Dems, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and it said that Jo Swinson could be our next Prime Minister. Do you think that it's realistic to say that Jo and the Lib Dems could actually win a majority in this election?
I think, going back to my previous answer, that when we had the 4 parties contesting every seat, then that was highly possible under first past the post. Now, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I actually think we should have proper proportional representation. We don't. We have a first past the post system where you can have someone elected as Prime Minister on just over 30-35% of the vote. Personally, I don't necessarily think that's right. But when there were 4 parties, it was really possible that we could have a Liberal Democrat government.
Yep, okay, thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Josh to ask some questions about the economy.
Yeah, you've got me again, unfortunately. As a party, you've pledged a great deal of public spending on things like the NHS and education, of course, and with good reason, I think. But of course, for those of us less financially minded, like myself, can you just explain where this money might come from?
So we know that if we stay in the EU, there will be a bounce in the economy. So what that means is that GDP will rise. When GDP rises, that improves the financial purse. There's more money to spend on things. So we have looked at that and said there would be 50 billion over the course of the next Parliament. And the Institute of Fiscal Studies have actually looked at our figures and said that's quite a conservative estimate. The balance in the economy could be greater, so there could be more money. What we don't know, or what the other parties can't be sure of, is in any kind of Brexit, that will actually damage the economy. It's hard to quantify exactly, but there have been so many organisations, including the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and government organisations, which are saying there will be less money to spend on public services.
Yeah, that's fine. Of course, you're saying, of course, that remaining in the EU would give the GDP a big bounce. Is that the Remain bonus that you're speaking of?
Yeah, that's what we talk about. We talk about the Remain bonus. But we also will be seeking to borrow money so that we can spend, over 130 billion on infrastructure projects. So we know we need to build more hospitals. We know we need to build more homes. We need to go back and look at our school buildings, which are falling apart through to underinvestment over a long period. So we'll be doing that too.
Fab. And of course, we are currently in the EU, so can you categorically say that there will be an economic bounce, or will it just remain at the same level it currently is?
So in 2014, we had the fastest growing economy in Europe. We now have one of the slowest growing economies, and it's been slow year on year since 2016. So we do know that there will be a boost to the economy. And nobody can absolutely predict the future,
No.
but there will be a boost because we will be able to trade across Europe in the way we have now. We won't have the additional costs. We'll still have everybody working together. It will make a huge difference.
Fantastic. And now the dreaded word Brexit is about to come out because Silas has got some questions on that.
The B word, as we call it now.
Yeah, the B word. So I heard that your party, if Jeremy Corbyn had the most amount of seats but still didn't have quite a majority, I think Jo Swinson has said that she wouldn't prop up a Jeremy Corbyn-led government. So if that were the case, how would you expect to get a second referendum, as that is your policy?
So Jo Swinson has been categorical. She doesn't think Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson are fit to be Prime Minister. She said that we won't support either. What we will do, though, is we'll be voting on an issue-by-issue basis. And if a People's Vote is brought to the House, and Liberal Democrat MPs will support a vote to have a People's Vote, because that's what we've been campaigning for 3.5 years. In fact, we've tried to bring it forward in Parliament 17 times. It actually was brought for a vote 7 times, but 7 times it was the other parties who turned it back. So if someone brings a People's Vote, Liberal Democrats will be voting for that.
Okay, so if Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, let's imagine that they were a couple of seats away from a majority, and the Lib Dems, one MPs. What would you, if Boris Johnson turned around and said, okay, Lib Dems, how about we put my deal to a second referendum alongside Remain? Would you be tempted to back that? Would that be enough for you to support him in government?
All I can say is the Liberal Democrats will win many more than a few seats. I'm confident about that, and we can definitely win here in Winchester. The key thing is Jo Swinson has been absolutely clear. We will not back a Conservative government, and definitely not one led by Boris Johnson.
Okay, yeah, that's very clear. So, do you think you obviously want another referendum? You've worked with the Greens, Plaid Cymru, can't remember the rest, in a Remain alliance. I think around 80 seats in the country.
Yeah,
Is that?
I think, it's about 80, maybe 100. I'm not sure.
Do you think that it would have been wise to work with Labour in some areas as well, just so, because obviously they want another referendum? Do you think the Lib Dems should have pulled out of a few seats that Labour could win in to try and get that through?
So when the Remain alliance was being put together, the Labour Party were approached to be part of that, and they decided not to. They chose not to be part of that Remain alliance, so that was a choice they made. We are part of that Remain alliance because we do want a People's Vote, we do want to remain in Europe. The Labour Party aren't a true Remain party because they want to negotiate their own deal on Brexit. So whether it's a red Brexit deal or a blue Brexit deal, it's still going to be bound to the country. And the key issue here really is that we don't have any Labour candidates stepping aside in any seats for the Liberal Democrats. They could split the vote here. A recent poll by YouGov tells us that we're 3 percentage points behind the Conservatives in this constituency. If people vote Labour here, they will split that vote. They will affect our ability to beat the Conservatives. So, it works both ways.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let's pretend for a moment that there was another referendum, and let's say that Leave won again. Would you then say, okay, we've had a referendum, we just accept the result? Would you accept the result if it was another Leave outcome?
I think if we have a confirmatory referendum and people knowing all the facts now, knowing how difficult it is to actually go through the process of leaving the EU, 40 years of working together, knowing all the facts, knowing the impact on the economy, on jobs, on our public services, on the way we interact with the European Union. If people vote to leave, then of course we would respect that decision because they're going in with their eyes open. It's like if you ever go to buy a house, the first time you go, it looks fantastic in the daylight. You have the survey done, you find that the The roof is bad, you find there's rising damp, and they're about to build a motorway down at the end of the garden. At that point, knowing the facts, you might change your mind. But if people knowing the facts still want to leave, then of course we'd respect it. But the Liberal Democrats are a pro-European party. So we would still be arguing that our best place is in Europe. We would still be wanting to build those close relationships.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think, so we've talked a lot about Brexit, so I'm going to move on to education, if that's okay. Yeah. So what is the Lib Dem, the national policy, just on education?
So we feel that education has been underfunded for years. I was talking to a teacher on the doorstep only yesterday, and she said to me, we've had to let 3 of our 5 teaching assistants go. Now what that means for what we can do for the children in the classroom, it has a huge impact on the school. So the children who need extra support aren't getting extra support. The teachers who are trying to teach a whole class sizes are rising. We have the biggest class sizes in the whole of Europe. She's trying to teach, but she doesn't have the support. It has a ramification for what she can do and the educational outcomes for those kids. So we do need to really fund our education properly. Now, the Conservatives have promised money, but that money is coming in the future. We're saying we need an immediate cash injection now. I think it's about 4.6 billion, which would go into schools right now to bring their funding levels back up to the level they were at in 2015. What that would mean is teachers would be able to get on with the job of teaching and stop having to worry about buying books, stop having to worry about equipment, stop having to worry about the fact they don't have the support staff. There are over 1,000 schools in the UK right now using crowdfunding for basics or using Amazon wish lists for the things they need in the classroom. That's outrageous. But there would also be an extra 10 billion. There would be a pay rise for teachers, but it would be funded. And new teachers would be paid £30,000 a year, but funded from central government, not asking schools to find that money from their own budgets right now, which would lead to more cuts.
Okay, I'd love to go through loads more issues like the NHS, climate change. We haven't got much more time, so I've got one more question from me. So you've worked with food banks in Winchester and have aligned yourself with the party had aligned itself with the Conservative austerity programme back in coalition. So how could you reconcile this position with the role of Lib Dems while supporting austerity in coalition, and with recent commitments by your party to run a permanent budget surplus, which would effectively mean a never-ending austerity measure? What would you say about that?
So there are things that the party voted for in coalition, which personally I think were wrong. I would never have voted for a bedroom tax. I would never have voted for the 2-child limit. I'm a long-term volunteer at Food Bank. I see the impact of that. I also look and see the impact of the 12 billion plus cuts to welfare that the Conservatives have made since 2015, and those are draconian. I spoke to someone just this morning who said to me, universal credit, I've been waiting 10 weeks for my first payment. 10 weeks. We've said under universal credit, where we bring all of the support that people can get together, people shouldn't have to wait more than 5 days to transition from one system to the next. Because if you're living day to day, hand to mouth, then you need to know that that money is going to come to you, because it's about feeding your family. It's really important. The Conservatives' manifesto, if you look at it, offers absolutely nothing in terms of saying that it would end austerity. There's nothing in there to say that people's lives at the bottom of the pile would get any better. Nothing at all. Now, we've said we need to be fiscally responsible. So we need to make sure our budget balances, but we will be putting a lot more money back into the system, giving all local authorities the money that they need to be able to support people all the way through. And the Conservatives will talk often. I think Theresa May said, I know she's history now, but she said austerity is over a couple of years ago. This year in Hampshire alone, there's another £80 million of cuts. £80 million happening this year alone. That's in adult social care, and that's in children's services. it will affect the most vulnerable people here in this constituency the most. So, yes, fiscally responsible, but absolutely focused on those people who need the most help.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So what we've done, we've asked our listeners to come up with a few questions. We'd love to have their involvement. So I'll hand over to Josh to take you through.
Yeah, of course. As Silas said, we've sent some tweets out and some messages just to gauge listeners' opinion and see what questions they'd like to ask you. I'm going to read them out word for word, just so they don't get twisted or anything like that. First one is: some see Jo Swinson as a polarising leader. Can you state categorically that you agree with her on the whole?
I think Jo's a great leader. I think she's different. She's very different to men of a certain age in suits. She's a young mum with a young family. She's full of energy. Yeah, and I support her. I think she's a great leader.
Fantastic. And how will you increase public confidence in those who are elected to represent the constituency by ensuring residents from all backgrounds are heard and actions to issues are raised and are undertaken when necessary?
One of the reasons I'm getting involved in politics is because I can't stand back, because it's such a mess, because people aren't listening. Because often those people with the loudest voices get heard, but those people who don't have the means to be heard don't get heard. I mean, I did get elected as a city councillor in May, and I spend most of my time in my ward. A ward is an area that you represent as a city councillor. So I've got some affluent areas, I've got some nice Victorian terrace houses, but I've also got an area which has some of the highest levels of deprivation in the whole of Hampshire. I spend my time up in that part of my ward because those are the people that need my help. Those are the people that don't know how to navigate the system. Those are the people who get pushed back when they've got something wrong. I spend my time with them. So I care passionately about people. I have no desire to be a career politician, but I do want change. And I want it to change for the better for everyone. Because for far too many people, life is getting worse and not better. The economy isn't working for them, and that needs to change.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And just to end the interview today, thank you very much for your time, of course. Can you just state one more time in like a little summary statement of a minute or two, just to say why you think you should be elected as the MP for Winchester?
I think you should elect me for the MP for Winchester. 1, if you want to stop Brexit. 2, if you want real action to address the climate and the nature emergency. We only have 10 years, and 5 of those will be in the next Parliament. And 3, if you want to see us look after the most vulnerable in our society. If you want to see the reality of daily lives get better, proper funding for our schools in the constituency, proper funding for our hospital, and proper funding for public services. But equally, if we stop Brexit, we know the economy will be strong here in the constituency, and there will be jobs, and there will be a future for all of us.
Okay, thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing how you get on.
Thanks, guys. Good to meet you both.
Thank you.